Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. It's the final day of September. 3/4 of 2024 just about done. Lots to unpack in the sports world and prepare for these final months of the year as October is just around the corner. So let's get this podcast on and popping, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as last Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And that's where I have to start. A mea culpa from yours truly to those wondering, J Reels, what happened last Thursday? We thought you were going to come on, maybe talk about what's happening as far as the weekend is concerned with the Major League Baseball wild card, National League, your beloved Mets, NFL, a big college football game there on Saturday night. Yes, I know. So I have to sincerely and deeply apologize as I was disconnecting from New York City, unplugging as I went upstate for a few days to celebrate my lovely wife's birthday, which was Friday. So by getting away, and I didn't know if this was going to be a quote-unquote game time decision for me to host this podcast, and I know that when I posted it on my YouTube channel that I was not going to have a podcast. It was one of those things where from the trickle-down effect of not only YouTube, but to Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, etc. It came later on, so that is my bad. Hand raised high in the air. You know, I always hold myself accountable and be transparent when it comes to what it is that I put forth and what it is that I do in order to produce and host these podcasts, not just once, but twice a week. And obviously last week that wasn't the case, so please, I hope you can understand for my ill will and my bad doing that if you can accept my apology, I would appreciate it. But let's get right to it, people, because not only is this the final day of the month, not only do we have these 3 months that are going to be wild and crazy now that the sports world is starting to take a turn with the NHL be a part of our consciousness here over the next few days as their season will begin in earnest a week from tomorrow. But you do have a couple of games this coming weekend, and NBA training camp opens up today with a big blockbuster deal that took place on Friday, which shocked a lot of people, including yours truly. But the first thing that I need to pay attention to here when it comes to the sports world, let's all exhale. Especially if you wear the blue and orange of the New York Mets, because all I've been asking for was just one win over the last 3 days, and I did get it yesterday, but now I need one more. And a Met fan, right now we are at the precipice. We are this close for qualifying, or I should say from qualifying to be a part of this 2024 postseason. And how many times have we seen it before? And I hate to bring back the 2007 and 2008 year where the Mets were that close, losing to the Marlins in both years, having a situation where they could have clinched the division and have gone on to a postseason, which, as we all know, did not happen. And now that the Mets got their victory yesterday, a 5-0 shutout thanks to Dave Peterson, who has just been masterful in the last few months of the season. And yesterday was no different. 7 innings, 8 strikeouts, 1 hit ball, as the Mets now live to see another day with not 1, but 2 games today, where we have to go back to last week where they lost that opening game in Atlanta. And then Hurricane Helene put her stamp on what the Mets' plans were for October, as they had to be put on pause because of the weather being a factor, not playing Wednesday, not playing on Thursday. And you could talk about it from here until you're blue in the face as to what Major League Baseball could have done to at least have played one of those 2 games, if not both, where they could have pushed the game to Monday, which was a scheduled day off for both teams, but Atlanta, the Braves didn't want that. And also maybe even playing early Wednesday, or maybe even doing a double dip on Tuesday, playing Tuesday afternoon and then Tuesday night, to where, who knows, it probably could have been sealed the fate of the NL playoff picture, because with the Diamondbacks now at 89-73, and with the Braves and Mets right now at a flat-footed tie, And both teams need just one win in order for them to qualify, because they do have the tiebreaker over both Arizona. And with that being said, I know the fans in Phoenix right now, they have to be just on pins and needles, knowing that whomever wins the first game today, they could pretty much take the second game off. But stranger things have happened. And I hate to say it, people, but with this Met team, you can never trust them. And it's not even just this team per se. It's the franchise. It's the big giant cloud that hangs over us, because for so many reasons, and one that I just mentioned about the 07-08 seasons, how they blew it on the last day of the season. And now here it is in a place where, as we all know, whether it's Turner Field, whether it's now Truist Park, formerly known as what, SunTrust Field or whatever it is, they changed these ballparks. And that ballpark's been open, what, 6-7 years? But now it boils down to this. One win. In fact, just win the first game. If they were to be able to win that first game, I could just put my feet up. I don't care if the Mets got blown out 50-0 and have to run through their pitching staff. Well, maybe that's a bit of a stretch. But my point is that win the first game. Don't have your fan base on pins and needles. Don't have your fan base now just with beads of sweat. And even if the Braves do win the first game, and you would think that they would take off and know that, all right, whomever was going to pitch in that second game, they could just put them on ice to have them pitch in the wild card round, because you'd want to save your pitchers at this point, knowing that the bigger picture lies come tomorrow. And if you're the Atlanta Braves, you know you want to knock the Mets out. You know that they do not want to be a part of this postseason, or you don't want to have them be a part of this postseason. And not because there's any rivalry between the two teams as it's constituted now, but this is more of a historic thing. And I'm sure there may be some people in that locker room that may say, yeah, let's get the Mets out of here. Or there may be some that say, we don't care. If we won the first game, all we want to do is just get ready to either go to San Diego or go to Milwaukee to play in the wild card round. And as it is right now, you have Tyler McGill in the first game going up against Spencer Schwellenbach. And in the second game, it's Luis Severino and Chris Sale. And we could argue all along that even if the Mets win the first game, will they pitch Severino in the second? And the same for the Braves. If Schwellenbach wins the first game, or the Braves do, will Chris Sale go? Where they could just pencil in Chris Sale for Tuesday, game one of the wild card. And the same for the Mets if they do win the first game. And that's where the Diamondback team and their fans will get screwed, because that's how they're going to look at it. They're going to base who's going to win the first game as to potentially who's going to take off for that second game. And yes, we could talk about seeding, because as we all know, if the Braves win the first game, they will already have clinched the season series, and they already have it now with a 6-5 advantage. So the Mets would have to sweep both games in order for them to get the 5 seed to have to go to San Diego. But again, it's all about just winning the one game. And obviously, if the Braves win the first game, they will already clinch a spot. So now it's up to the Mets to win that second game. All these different, I don't want to say all, but these permutations that exist, it all goes away if the Mets win the first game. That's it. Because I don't care if the Mets win the second game to go to San Diego. At this point, I'd rather them just win the first game, rest Severino for game one in Milwaukee on Tuesday or tomorrow, and that's it. Wash your hands and just get out of Atlanta with just the one win. And win the first game. Don't win the second. To me, how I look at it is that if they lose the first game, they're flirting with disaster. And how I look at this double dip that's going to take place in a few hours, it's either going to be an Atlanta sweep, which I wouldn't be shocked, I hate to say it, or it's going to be a split, because I'd be absolutely floored if the Mets were to sweep this doubleheader. And I hate to even frame it that way. And not only that, but I think that if the Mets were to win any of these two games, I could see them winning the first game, but not the second. So if it's a thing where the Braves win the first game, do I have any faith that the Mets will win the second game? I hate to say it, there's a part of me that does not. And I'd actually be shocked if the Mets win the second game. I could see them playing the way they did yesterday. They came right out of the gate. Lindor, who got that stolen base, as I tuned into the game, I was watching the Steeler game, so I don't even know how Lindor got on base. I think he actually got a walk, but then stole second, and then Nimmo brought him home on a base hit. And they came out of the gate flying, and the Mets pretty much cruised to a 5-0 victory. And they left in Colin Ray, the Milwaukee Braves starter, Milwaukee Brewers. My team's all over the maps. Milwaukee Braves were back in the days, in the 50s with Hank Aaron when they won a World Series. This is the Brewers. Jay Reels, come on. I know you got Atlanta, you got New York, you got Milwaukee, all in the brain here. So now as I get that straightened out, as they left Colin Ray in, the Brewer manager, Pat Murphy, in a little bit too long, but of course he didn't want to tax his bullpen. He wanted to give his game and his team a day off heading into the wild card round tomorrow. But now we have a situation where it all is in front of us, Met fans. Like I said, win the first game. And when we think back to the last time we saw Spencer Schwellenbach, he was the starter of that game last Tuesday night to where the Mets had no answers. And now let's see if they could respond, knowing that they've seen him just a week ago, and he's actually had success against the Mets this year, that they could be able to get out from in front and know what to expect when it comes to the Braves hurler. So let's see if the Mets could get out fast and furious, hold that lead, and then just win the game, and that's it. I don't have to worry about the second game. I don't have to even think about it, because the last thing I want to do is have to worry come 4:40, which is the scheduled time for the second game, and then coming off of a loss, whether or not the Mets are going to be able to go 9 innings or beyond, quite possibly, to see whether or not they're going to qualify for this postseason. So that's how I look at it. I have more faith in the first game. I don't want to see Chris Sale in the second game. It'll be interesting to see that even if the Mets do lose the first game, knowing that the Braves will clinch, will Chris Sale start in the second game? Or will they just put Chris Sale for game one, whether it be, well, in this case, it will be in San Diego, because by them winning, not only will they clinch, but they already have the tiebreaker over the Mets. So that's it. I'm sure they would want to save Sale for the trip to San Diego and have the lefty, and in all likelihood, maybe even the NL Cy Young Award winner when it's all said and done, ready to start the postseason, as opposed to pitching a meaningless second game against the Mets. So that's what we have, people. Now everything else is pretty much set when it comes to the wild card round. And let me get to some wild card storylines here, because there are some juicy ones. I won't talk about the Yankees or the Guardians. Same for the Dodgers and Phillies. I'm going to save that for Thursday's podcast, because we all know the division series will start on Saturday. But I just want to talk about wild card only. And to me, the first wild card storyline that I have, it's going to be, we can talk about the upstart Tigers and Royals, and that is a storyline. But I want to know whether or not the Baltimore Orioles are going to be able to erase the last 6 to 8 weeks. And granted, they had a real good week. They beat the Yankees 2 out of 3, and hooray for Jay Reels. I was 3-3 with my over-under numbers. Please, that's nothing to write home about. But it looked like it was going to be in the toilet, considering they went to Yankee Stadium last week with 86 wins. I needed 4-2 over the last 6 games for them to eclipse the 89.5, which was the over-under total number for the year. And by them winning 2 out of 3 and then sweeping the Twins over the weekend, they got to 91, so I was able to eclipse that and have a very average 500 year when it comes to over-under win totals. But now let's see what's going to happen here with this Oriole team, with all the expectations. And yes, last year, winning a division and getting swept out of the postseason by the Rangers, and coming into this year, which was supposed to be a big-time year, maybe even a follow-up to what happened last year, and it certainly looked like that for the first 2/3 of the season. But the last, like I mentioned, 6 to 8 weeks, they just bottomed out. And although they did have a strong end of the year, winning 5 of 6, can they be able to pick it up and host a Kansas City team that has had a big year in its own right, making it to the postseason for the first time since they won a World Series 9 years ago? And to me, this is going to be squarely on Corbin Burns, the reason why they brought him here to Baltimore, and an impending free agent, I might add, to see whether or not that they're going to be able to outlast this young Royal team. And even though they have Salvador Perez, the last remaining member of that World Series team, on the roster, but a lot of pressures on the Orioles to win this series. From there, I don't want to say it's house money, because they still have young talent. They have a #1 starting pitcher in an ace in Burns, and who knows what else they're going to get. They're not going to get Grayson Rodriguez to pitch in this postseason, as he Obviously, he's been injured at the last part, and especially this last month of the season, and will not be on any of their rosters, no matter how deep they go into this postseason. And we know their pitching staff, I don't want to say it's in shambles, but it's going to be piecemeal together with the Zach Eflins in the world and the Dean Kramers and who's your Game 4 starter. If you get to a division series, that is up in the air. But squarely number one, I think a lot of pressure's on Baltimore. Number two are the Astros. Are they going to get to an 8th straight ALCS? You would think so based on their track record, but this Astro team, I don't want to say they come out of nowhere. And after that sluggish start, as I talked about throughout the summer, 12-24, I didn't think they were going to make it to the postseason, but here they are once again. And they're going to have to face another team that had come out of nowhere and had a tremendous run here over the last month or so, really since the middle of August. And now we're just a day away from October, so the last month and a half, where the Tigers have just been relentless. And you have to wonder whether or not they're going to run out of gas. And maybe they get to this point, not to say that they're happy to be here, but it's like, all right, we made it here, and now they're going to go up against a team that knows its way around winning. And even with A.J. Hinch, the former Astro manager who pretty much started this whole run with that 2017 World Series, you want to call them cheaters, you have every right to do so, but he was a big and instrumental part of the success early on with this Astro ball club to now, here he is facing against them in the postseason. But the Astros are going to be a team that, with their veteran leadership, we all know the cast of characters, the Jose Altuves, the Alex Bregmans, the Yordan Alvarez's, who knows, with Kyle Tucker. But for this Astro team, and even with the rotation, led by Framber Valdez, who knows with Justin Verlander, and you have to think whether or not Hunter Green's going to be a big part of this postseason and how he performs at the top end of this rotation. I said Hunter Brown. I said Hunter Green. My apologies. I'm thinking of the Reds pitcher. But for this Astro team, do they have enough in the tank to get back to an ALCS? And I get it. They have to win this series and then get through a DS, but we know the Astro pedigree. Would you be shocked if they get back to a championship series? I can't say I would, but I'm going to say right now, I don't know if they're going to be able to get there. I think they'll win this series. I think they'll beat the Tigers. And with Baltimore, I think they're going to do the same. And it's weird with this wild card round because ever since they've expanded rosters, the playoffs to where now we have 6 teams, and with the best 2 out of 3 2 years ago when this was first instituted, we've only had 1 series out of the 8 that's been played where it's gone to a decisive 3rd game. And of course, what series was that? The Padres beating the Mets, Joe Musgrove, the one-hitter, and need I say more? So we've seen a lot of these series, 7 of the 8 been sweeps, 2-game sweeps at that. So I would think that the Astros, I'm going to say they're going to win in a sweep. And as far as the Orioles, I'm going to say that goes an extra game. But I wouldn't be surprised if Baltimore sweeps. But I'm going to say one of those series are going to go 3 games. So I'll pick Baltimore winning over the Royals in 3. Now, as far as the National League, the storyline's there to me. Will the Brewers be able to have this big success of a regular season to have any pull here in October? And as we've seen in recent vintage, last year they got swept by the Diamondbacks in the wild card round. We know what happened there a few years ago in the division series where they lost to the Brewers, where Freddie Freeman hit that home run. That was in 2021. But the Brewers, you have to go back 6 years to when they went to an NLCS and they lost in a brutal 7th game to the Dodgers. Now, this is a team that you couldn't pick out of a lineup. Guys like Jackson Chourio, the young rookie, with a veteran leader like Rhys Hoskins, and players that you can't really pick out. Willie Adames had a monster year and is going into a free agent year, the shortstop. So we know that this team has talent, and they've been able to play from in front pretty much from the start of the year. But now, is that going to translate here into October to where maybe they'll have some success and get not only to a division series, but to a championship series? Can they play the type of baseball throughout the regular season to where they'll have success here in October? To me, I'll believe it when I see it. I think whomever they play, and I can't really predict these series right now because we don't know if the Mets are going to go to Milwaukee, which could be the likelihood, could be. Or is it going to be Arizona that's going to go to Milwaukee? Well, they can't go to Milwaukee because of the tiebreaker. Arizona, yeah, they will be able to go to Milwaukee because Atlanta will go to San Diego if that's the case. So I can't really predict what's going to happen here in the wild card because obviously it's not set. And then you have the other team that's going to represent here in the wild card is San Diego. Now, after a down year last year, they've bounced back nicely. And they had gotten off to a slow start with Mike Schilt as the manager. And we know what happened the last couple of years with Bob Melvin. Yes, they did go to a championship series where they lost to the Phillies in 5. But last year was just a terrible year to where Melvin exited and went to San Francisco. And then Schilt came in and did a masterful job. And the team looks like they could be a team as a dark horse here in the National League. And they're going to be one to reckon with, I think, when it's all said and done. And even if they do play Atlanta in the first round, which would be very intriguing, but the San Diego, what do they have? Knowing that they've been down this road before a couple of years ago and have bounced back after last year's ginormous disappointment, do they have any legs to have a deep run in October similar to what they did a couple of years ago? So unfortunately, I can't predict. And what I will do is if you watch the YouTube channel at JReels, come tomorrow, I won't say tonight, but come tomorrow, I'll predict who will win those series, whether Arizona does happen to get in, and the only way they get in is if the Mets get swept or Atlanta gets swept. And obviously, we all know the scenario regarding both Atlanta and the Mets qualifying for the postseason. So that's what I have in my storylines. That's what I have with the wild card. I want to get to a few other things when it comes to baseball. And you had some firings there or you had a firing last week with David Bell. I think I talked about that briefly. The Cincinnati Red manager. So they're going to look for a new skipper there in the Queen City, as well as in Miami with Skip Schumaker. And the Marlins even mentioned that he's not going to come back. And think about this. Here's a guy, and it's not Schumacher's fault by any stretch, but here's a guy that came in last year, took the Marlins to the postseason, backed by the GM, Kim Ng, the previous year in 2023, where they had a very good season, a season that surprised a lot of people. And granted, they got swept by the Phillies in the opening round, but something to build off of. And what did you see? They had a terrible year this year. Traded players left and right at the deadline, the Tanner Scotts of the world, the Brian De La Cruzes of the world. We go on down the line. And then what happened? Before last year, when Kim Ng decided that she didn't want to be a part of the organization, I guess the direction that they were going, and we all know what happened there with Derek Jeter leaving prior to the start of the 2023 year, Kim Ng said, I built this team and you don't want to trust me at the reins? Well, that's fine. So then you bring in the new GM, and what does he do? They restructured the contract for Skip Schumaker to where he would have had an option this year, but they took the option away. So therefore, Schumaker said, the hell with you guys. I'm out of here, to the tune where he told his team on Friday, I'm not coming back next year. Sorry, guys. And even left the team to tend to a family matter, or that's what was mentioned there in Toronto. And now here they are back at ground zero again, trying to rebuild and trying to tell the fan base that, all right, we're going to bring in a new manager and the team is rudderless and directionless. And what a mess down there in Miami if you're a Marlin fan, the 16 of you that are out there. So you have that scenario going on. You also had the White Sox lose 121 games. Now, they did a great job this week. They swept the Angels at home in their final series. And then, even though the Tigers did win one of the 3 games, but the White Sox won the other 2. So although they eclipsed the Mets' 120 loss season of 1962, but they didn't match their win total of that same year because the Mets were 40-120, so 41-121, but still it's going to go down as arguably the worst season in Major League Baseball history, especially in the 1900s on, because we know the Cleveland Spiders, and what was it, 1890-something, lost, I believe it was at 132 games, which is almost unconscionable. Or I think it was 134, now that I think about it. So the White Sox now, with their tails between their legs, they just thank God that the season's over. They could go off into the autumn and winter and just kind of get themselves together, and let's see where their offseason is going to go. But now that we have concluded this regular season and with the two other things of note that I want to bring up. Charlie Blackmon, the longtime Colorado Rocky, last game yesterday as he called it a career a few days prior to the end of the season, had a nice send-off there where he ran out into the field at the start of the game. His teammates stood behind as he got a big ovation. 14 years in Colorado, behind Todd Helton on all the offensive categories when it comes to all the numbers, average, hits, doubles, etc. And great career there for Charlie Blackmon, an all-star, won a batting title there, I think 2019, I believe it was 2017. The long beard, how could you not spot him out? So Blackmon goes off into the sunset. Kudos to him and the next chapter of his life. And then the A's leaving Oakland. And that was one that was much ballyhooed. That last game, they had over 46,000 there at the Oakland Alameda Coliseum. And for them to win that final game, and there was a bit of controversy surrounding that where the front office had told the manager, Mark Kotsay, not to say anything or to really keep it hush in the press, not to really even get into the point where he was going to get emotional, which he did in the dugout prior to the game, and then he addressed the crowd at the end of the game. And Mark Kotsay, who was an Oakland A and bounced around, was a Marlin, San Diego Padre, but had 3 years as a member of the Athletics during his playing days, and then now as a manager where, of course, he was going to get emotional. Of course, he had to say some things as the head honcho of this organization that actually had a decent year for them. A lot of people thought that they were going to have a bad year, not to say they had a good year by any stretch, but they did have some promise there with their lineup and did play with a lot of spark here over the course of this final stretch. Of course, you can't say the same during that next to last series against the Yankees as they got swept, but still, that was just a tough and teary send-off for an A's team that had been there for 57 years. We know about the titles that they won in the 70s and the Bass Brothers of the late 80s into the early 90s. They only won one World Series, and they went to 3 straight. And now all they have is just those memories as they'll head to Sacramento, and we would think to Las Vegas after that. I don't know if they've even broken ground in Vegas. We know that the old Tropicana has been demolished, and that's where they were going to put the ballpark, but who knows, as of right this second. But we know they're going to Sacramento for 3 years, and that was just like I said, a fond farewell. 46,000 came out, which was great. I understand too little, too late. We could talk about who was at fault, and everybody was at fault here, from the owner to the mayor to the city council people that were responsible of trying to keep the A's in Oakland. And as we've seen here, between the Warriors going to the other side of the bay in San Francisco, to the Raiders going to Las Vegas, as we know, and then now the A's gone to where you had 3 teams as early as, 5 years ago? Now have a big fat goose egg. So that's what I have with the baseball. Let me see, anything else to discuss? No, let me move it along here as we now turn our attention. I put on the helmet and shoulder pads to get to the NFL and college as I double dip here when it comes to what's happening on the gridiron. And with the NFL, week 4, the only highlight that I have, or a couple of highlights here, because it was a dud of a week. I know you had the last second field goal there in the Saints-Falcon game where Young-Ho Koo hit a 58-yarder there at the buzzer. And that's a big rivalry, as we know, in the NFC South, which now puts both of those teams at 2-2, the Saints and the Falcons. And other games of note yesterday, to me, the big one was Baltimore and Buffalo. And boy, did Buffalo, were they still in their hotel rooms? Did they not make it onto the bus? Because they just got ran out of the building, as evidenced by the 87-yard touchdown run by Derrick Henry, who was untouched, by the way. And for that to pretty much start off the game there early in the first quarter, that was an indication of what was to come there, as the Ravens just blew out the Buffalo Bills 35-10, which may now beg the question, are the Ravens now back to where they should be after losing a tough opener to the Chiefs there on a Thursday night to start the season, and then an inexplicable loss to the Raiders there where they were up by 10 in the fourth quarter. And then now, after winning back-to-back games and with a big game in Cincinnati this coming weekend, can we say that the Ravens are back? Now, they're still 2 games behind the Chiefs in the standings when it comes to the AFC, and they're still a game behind the Steelers in the division. And I understand it's just 4 weeks. After next week, we'll already be a little bit past a quarter into the season. But you would think, if the recipe is going to be what we've seen here the last 2 weeks for the Ravens, and especially last night, where they're going to run the ball, Lamar Jackson only threw the ball 17 times and had a good game, big game for him. We know about Derrick Henry rushing for over 180 yards on less than 20 carries, and that's what we've seen here. He hasn't had a lot of carries in these games throughout the first 4 because Derrick Henry is not going to be that back that's going to punish you for 25, 30 carries a game. I'm sure if it's going to be warranted, that will probably be when you get later into November, December, into the home stretch and into the real teeth of the schedule. But for right now, I would have to think that the Ravens, and this is going to be a big game for them against Cincinnati. Now, I think it's going to be bigger for the Bengals than it is for the Ravens. But if the Ravens are going to let this one stick and know that they blew out the Bills, and with the Bengals on deck, I think that they're going to start to wreak havoc, especially when they start to play from in front and they beat up a Bills team that, I get it, maybe they were due to lose, and they had that Monday night blowout against Jacksonville. But for Baltimore, maybe they answered a lot of questions on whether or not a lot of people thought they could have fallen into a 1-3 hole and have to dig themselves out of that and to stack themselves up against the big boys of the AFC. Well, we saw what they did in the opening game against Kansas City, and then last night they just blew the doors off of the Bills there down at M&T Bank Stadium. But besides that, the only other thing that I really have from yesterday, the Jets. I mean, that was as bad of a loss to a Bronco team that their offense is from hunger. Now, granted, they did have a good performance there against Tampa, and Tampa bounced back nicely against the Eagles, and maybe that's more on the Eagles, but I'll get to them in a minute. But for Bo Nix to throw his first touchdown pass of his NFL career 4 games into his career, and I get it, it was a rainy, sloppy, just terrible weather day out at MetLife. But Aaron Rodgers, who got sacked 5 times, and I hate to say it, looked like an old man there as he was trying to get out of the harm's way from the Bronco pass rush and had limped off the field there late in the game to where they had an opportunity after Will Lutz missed a field goal there where it gave the Jets life and set themselves up for where Greg the Leg Zuerlein, all he had to do was hit a 50-yarder and it sailed wide right. And that is a loss that's going to sting. And the reason why I say that is because who do the Jets have up next? And I don't want to say that they're world beaters by any stretch, but you have to respect what they've done here over the first 4 weeks of the season. And that's the Minnesota Vikings. But no, they're not playing at MetLife. No, they're not even playing at US Bank in Minnesota. This is your first London game to where they have to fly across the pond overseas to play 9:30 a.m. local against an undefeated team. And oh yes, against a guy that was once drafted by this organization and a one Sam Darnold. You don't think he's licking his chops to look at what has transpired with that team after them drafting Zach Wilson and then bringing Aaron Rodgers? You don't think that Sam Darnold is going to want to stick it to his former franchise? The Jets could be staring at 2-3 right now. And to think, the sky will be falling if that's the case. And if you're Robert Saleh and even maybe to a certain extent Joe Douglas, that seat is not only warm, it may be starting to heat up. And a lot faster than I'm sure that they would like. So that was another game that I thought was big because a lot of people thought that the Jets, after what they did to New England and after having a 10-day layoff, that was another thing too, where maybe the Jets could be 3-1, taking that trip to London, and now here they are at 500, flirting maybe with coming back to the States at 2-3. We'll talk more about that on Thursday, but for the Jets, that was just a brutal and typical Jet loss when you think about it. And then the other thing that I take away from yesterday, before I even get to these games, maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers have found their quarterback. And I know it's 4 games. And I know the Colts aren't the Colts of the Peyton Manning variety of the mid-2000s. But what you saw there yesterday after being down 17-0, and yeah, they did start off slow, and you had a terrible fumble by George Pickens when it looked like they were going to get back in the game there in the first half. And then I understand that we get it. when it comes to Fields, he has a problem securing the ball at times, and for whatever reason, he was trying to evade a pass rush that when he got to midfield, he fumbled the ball, and an opportunity for them to at least maybe kick a field goal, and that wasn't even the case as they were out of field goal range, as I mentioned. But a stupendous job. Rushed for 2 touchdowns, threw another to Pat Fryermuth as they were down 17-0 before you could blink. And they had a valiant comeback, which fell short. They actually had a chance to tie on the final drive, but they turned the ball over on downs, and they get their first loss of the year at 27-24 to the Colts. And this is after Anthony Richardson had to leave the game because of a hip. And even though he wanted to get back into the lineup or back under center again, but Joe Flacco was looking like the Super Bowl MVP at times. And I know his numbers weren't off the page. 16 for 26, 100 and whatever, 80-something yards. He did have a couple of touchdowns, but he was in the pocket, made throws, and was just steady throughout. But for the Steelers to get their first loss, and how I looked at it was maybe the Steelers have their quarterback. Now, mind you, he is not signed after this year. And who knows, unless he just all of a sudden wets the bed and does not play well, and they hand the reins over to a one Russell Wilson who is waiting in the wings. But for Fields yesterday, what was he, 23 of 34, 22 of 34, 312 yards, a TD, showed a lot of poise, had the offense in rhythm even after a slow start. And the Colt defense, I don't know what happened, because in the first half, they were looking like that Colt defense of Bob Sanders, Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis. I mean, what was I watching? And the Colts, who had the worst run defense in the National Football League going into yesterday, well, they certainly didn't look like that yesterday. And I understand the Steelers are missing an offensive lineman, and they weren't able to rush the ball the way they had successfully in the first 3 games. But here I am talking Steeler football here, and I usually save them for last, but I only brought it up because of Fields and maybe him being the guy in Pittsburgh, not only just for this year, but maybe for the long term. And granted, they lost the game, but he didn't really do much to harm them, even though he did have that fumble. But let's see if he's going to be the guy, not only for the remainder of the season, barring injury or just a collapse on his part, but I like what I've seen so far in these first 4 games with number 2, Justin Fields at center. And then you also have Minkah Fitzpatrick, and I get it. The NFL is not your NFL of your uncle or even your daddy's NFL, or even my NFL that I've come to know and love in the mid to late 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. But Minkah Fitzpatrick got called on that flag where he tried to hold up. And even early in the game where Richardson, a lot of people thought maybe he was concussed, where Richardson slid and Fitzpatrick, all he could do was just try to brace his hit. And even though he led with his shoulder, but his helmet did make contact with Richardson to the point where he wasn't flagged, but then later on got flagged and said, wait, you can't even hit in this league anymore. And he made some perfect points, because it's kind of hard to let up on a guy when he's sliding and you're trying to go low because you don't want to try to go up high. And it's just a mess with this NFL and how it is sometimes. And we've talked about this until we're blue in the face. But he's absolutely right. And Fitzpatrick is a guy who's a former first-team All-Pro, obviously a Pro Bowl safety, one of the top safeties in the sport. So if there's anybody that can speak on it, it's certainly him. So those to me were the big noteworthy games of yesterday, or at least items. Fields, maybe your starter. Jets lose a brutal game. Ravens, are they back? Because as we go through the schedule yesterday, I'm not even going to get into some of these games because they're not even worth discussing. And yes, we could talk about Minnesota being 4-0. They had a 28-0 lead before the Packers came roaring back. And although they fell short, and Jordan Love, who did not have a good game, and even though I understand his numbers may not show that because a lot of that was in garbage time, but for Jordan Love, and I'm sure the Packers are happy to have him back, but that was a game that if you're the Packers, although you're happy to have him back, but now you're 2 games behind, really 2.5 behind the Vikings in the division, and with the Lions playing tonight, and let's see if they could get to 3-1 against a Seahawks team that's undefeated. Now you have a scenario where the Packers could be a fringe playoff team. Now, a lot could happen. We understand we're only 4 games into the 2024 year, but that was a significant loss, knowing that they were at home, Love coming back, and the Vikings had their way with you for 3 quarters. So how I look at it, even though 31-29 was the final, and yes, there's some things you could take out of it if you're a Packer fan, but to me, they did not show up in that game because for as close as that final score looks like, it was anything but. But to go through the rest of the schedule, I mean, Washington, way to back up the Monday night game against Cincinnati by winning on the road in Arizona 42-14. And Arizona, they look to be, a lot of people thought maybe with what they did in the first couple of weeks as they played well in Buffalo and they just blew out the Rams. But now they've regressed to where they've lost 2 in a row. And then yesterday, what was that game about? So maybe you got something going on and something brewing in Washington with that quarterback. And, of course, the head coach being Dan Quinn. San Francisco beats New England 30-13. Big whoop there as they're going to have a long year, the Patriots. Am I going to get into what happened with the Bears? All right, they beat the Rams. We know the Rams have been scuffling here, even with the win against the Niners last week, which they had no business doing so. But now they're 1-3, and let's see if Sean McVay can pick up the pieces where the Bears winning are now 2-2. We talked about Atlanta, New Orleans. The game there on Thursday night, Dallas and the Giants. I get it that it was close, but a bunch of field goals, nothing to write home about. Dallas wasn't spectacular, to say the least. So what did that show and prove to me? Knowing that the Cowboys came off with 2 bad home blowouts in their building. I mean, listen, the Giants hung around and actually had a shot. But when you have Daniel Jones, and he didn't play badly, but that was a Thursday night game to not remember in the least. What else we have here? All right, Kansas City and the Chargers. Kansas City, they win high scoring, or they can win a game like they did yesterday, 17-10. Kareem Hunt came back, made a contribution. Patrick Mahomes, yes, did his thing. The touchdown there to Xavier Worthy, but it stuck. And I understand it was 10-10, but the Chiefs and even Travis Kelce made a contribution. A lot of people thought that Kelce could be on his last legs, the other side of the mountain, but he actually played pretty well for him. 7 catches for what, 68 yards or 89 yards? I can't even read here. I need some glasses, people, so forgive me there. And J.K. Dobbins, who has not performed in the last 2 weeks the way he did in those opening 2 weeks for the Chargers. And there you have it. And even down 10-0, they came back to win the game, and Samaje Perine got the touchdown there, which pretty much was the game winner. And there you have it. Chiefs ho-hum 4-0. Not impressive, to say the least, in these first 4 games, but you got to give it up for the two-time defending champs for them to continue on this roll to start off their season. And what else can I get into? Oh, Tampa and the Eagles. What a bounce-back win for the Buccaneers after that putrid performance against Denver, as I talked about. Baker Mayfield, and I know there were some comments there made on a podcast in reference to him being in that locker room with guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, where there was a lot of pressure with the other quarterback that was in the locker room prior to him getting there. And even though he said that the words were taken out of context, that it was not what it had seemed, and even Tom Brady had a little clap back there in the booth as he did the game with the Eagles in Tampa there yesterday, saying that, well, if I wanted to take a vacation, then I would have gone to Disneyland with my kids. It was all about winning Super Bowl. So yeah, the pressure was mounted. The pressure week in and week out was to win, was to build, was to try to get back and get the brass ring. Something that Baker Mayfield knows nothing about, but Mayfield, I guess tongue-in-cheek, said that, and you saw before the game where Mayfield and Brady got together, so it seems like no harm, no foul with the 2 quarterbacks there. But for anything else with that game, very impressive by Mayfield. Eagles did not have a shot. Jalen Hurts just had a putrid first half. And now the Eagle fans, they're going to be thinking, what is going to happen with this team throughout the remainder of this year? Because a lot of people looked at the quarterback coach, Nick Sirianni, that is, relationship as maybe even frayed. I'm not going to say fractured, but frayed a little bit. Is that going to be now part of the narrative moving forward with this team, knowing that they have not gotten off to a great start? Yes, they did so in Brazil, but we saw what happened there the Monday night against Atlanta. And then they barely got by the Saints there last week. And now here they are putting a 33-16 defeat behind them and try to pick up the pieces after that. I'm not going to say it's going to be a long year in the city of brotherly love, but certainly not the start that they've wanted, I'm sure, as a fan base, knowing that they had one good win and the other 3 games not really convincing, to say the least, where they probably should have won against Atlanta, and the Saints, you could say they probably could have even lost that game, and then yesterday they were a no-show. So, other than that, speaking of no-shows, can I talk about the Browns? Now, they had a shot there at the end of 2016 as Deshaun Watson rolled out left, and what does he do? He gets sacked. He doesn't even, I understand you can't throw it away, but you got to try to make a play there if you're Deshaun Watson. You've been in this league for enough years to know that you got to try to, I understand you got to get in the end zone, but for Watson, they are looking at a long year, and I picked them as an over this year because I thought based on what they did last year, they had 12 wins with 4 quarterbacks contributing to their 12-win effort. I thought that, all right, maybe Deshaun Watson, a lot to prove. And what has he done? He has been just god-awful as the Raiders have bounced back from that just ugly defeat at the hands of the Carolina Panthers there a week before in their building. And speaking of which, the Panthers, they couldn't back up that win, losing to the Bengals 34-24 at home. So the Bengals got their first win of the season. As I talked about, they have the Ravens coming in, and that's a huge game for the Bengals no matter how you slice it. And that's your NFL. I mean, not a lot to really chew on. Yeah, you got a few games. All right, Houston beating Jacksonville. I overlooked that game. Jacksonville's 0-4. Who knows if Doug Peterson is going to survive this? They went to a postseason 2 years ago, won a postseason game, competitive in Kansas City in the division round, and bottomed out last year. They've just flat out been terrible to start off this year. And although they played well in the game, but they did lose in the closing minutes. C.J. Stroud had another big game, 345 yards in the air, as the Texans win at home against Jacksonville. But that's it. Nothing else to discuss. Oh, yeah, by the way, you have 2 Monday night games. A Monday night doubleheader, which we had last week. Tennessee at Miami, that's going to be a snooze fest. Seattle at Detroit, much better game where you're going to have Buck and Aikman on the call. I read a post from someone on Twitter, which to me summed it all up. The NFL, over the last few years, but more so this year, 2024, is like going through one of those strips, let's say one of those, not highways, but let's say you go through a town that has a major street, major road, and all you see on this road are fast food restaurants. You have your burger joints, you have your chicken joints, you have maybe even a barbecue joint. You have all of the pick of the litter, whatever it is that you want. And that's what the NFL's become. It has become fast food because whether it's on a Thursday, whether it's on a Sunday at 1, 4, 8 o'clock, Monday night doubleheader, you have so much to choose from that by the time you're done, you're almost sick of it. It's almost you've had too much. And this is one of the reasons why, shameless plug, 7 reasons why I'm down in the NFL. Go to my YouTube channel to check it out. This is why the NFL has too many mouths to feed, has oversaturated their product, has now even wore the product in to the point where it's ad nauseum. Just have the 1 game on Monday night. We don't need 2 games. Please, NFL. And I think there's one more doubleheader later on this year. So that's all I got to say about that as I move it along. With any key injuries yesterday, let me go NFL. Yeah, DeMarcus Lawrence out 4 to 6 weeks with a Lisfranc injury, no injury or no surgery needed. So that is a big sigh of relief for the Cowboy fan, but still one they have to deal with without their big-time pass rusher. Javon Hargrave from the week before, Niners, he's done for the year. And the Niners, we all know, they've been hurting more so on the offensive side of the ball as he has a torn tricep. So he is definitely toast. Then you have Yannick Ngakoue signed, I believe, to the practice squad of the Ravens as they look to try to get some reinforcements for a pass rush on their team. And Brett Favre, he did state the other day in this whole scandal, I believe, with this insurance fraud and money that was supposed to go one place. I know the story, but to really unpack that now, I'm not going to get into. But he did state during this court hearing that he does have Parkinson's disease. Now, was this the platform for him to say so? Because I believe what they were trying to do was put forth some money toward a pharmaceutical to maybe not cure or possibly treat Parkinson's disease. I can't even pronounce that. Sounds like I have it, to knock on wood, J Reels. Parkinson's disease? Come on, wake up here. So for Favre to come out and say that to the world, all right, we know the amount of hits that he took throughout the course of his career. We know that the addiction he had of Vicodin throughout the course of his long, storied Hall of Fame career, and maybe it's caught up to him to the point where, yes, this is what he admitted and announced there the other day. Hey, that's not something you could kid about. That's not something you can knock. Yes, we could talk about Favre, maybe with this whole thing regarding the insurance fraud, where did this money go, so on and so forth. That you could certainly put on another platform to critique, but as far as him having this disease, that's something you certainly can't kid around with. So, hey, let's just only hope that however he's treating it or whatever it is that he's doing, that he's just putting the word out there with others such as Michael J. Fox, and we know Muhammad Ali before he passed. We know that he had it for so many years, and now Favre, let's see if he could be a spokesperson for it for now and for the future. Now let me get to college football. We know about the game on Saturday night. Now, I have to say this, people. I was wrapped up in the Met game and also Padres Diamondbacks. So I was in and out of this game, and of course I was more out than in based on Alabama sprinting out to a 28-0 lead, and before you knew it, you thought that this game was going to be over. But Georgia was heard from. They came all the way back. And Kirby Smart, I'm sure he's kicking himself because I saw it with my own eyes at 33-21. Why did he go for two was beyond me. He could have just gone for one. I don't want to hear percentages. I don't want to hear analytics. No, nonsense. If he would have went for one there, they still would have been two scores. Because as it was, they would have got the two. It would have been a 10-point deficit as opposed to 11. And I get it. Sometimes to get that two-point conversion is tricky. But ask them on that two-point conversion at 33-21 where they failed. So therefore, they got the touchdown to draw closer at 33-28. And mind you, if you kick the extra point, it's 33-29. And then if they got the touchdown afterwards, you kick the extra point, you had 36-33. And as we saw there, when they got the touchdown to make it 33-28, I thought to myself, I said, all right, let's see what Alabama's going to do on this drive. And Alabama, although they got a first down there, and even the first down at 33-21, where they were trying to eat up some clock, and they failed to do so. So when Georgia answered back with the touchdown to draw within 5, now you had Alabama after the first down. Why is the Alabama offense in a rush to get these plays off? They're snapping the ball with 15 seconds on the play clock, and then to make it worse, on third down, where they are trying to, of course, execute a play, but at third down, they're almost in hurry up. Why are they doing that? So what happens? They were unable to get the fourth down. They had to punt the ball back to Georgia. Georgia gets the big pass play to now make it a 34-33 game. They go for two. What happens? Carson Beck tries to go up the middle, gets stuffed. And as I mentioned before, if they would have kicked the extra point, and I understand, you can't play the game out from that vantage point. But here's the thing about two-point conversions and about analytics and all that. Don't chase for 2 points unless you absolutely, positively have to. Because one more time, they kick the extra point there. It's 33-22. Again, I understand you don't know how the rest of the game is going to play out. But as we saw, if they would have kicked the extra point, they got the touchdown, get the extra point, it's 33-29. Then they got the touchdown, they would have been up by 3 points. Now, mind you, it didn't matter because what did you see after that? Jalen Milroe finding Ryan Williams on the right sideline to where I don't know what that quarterback was doing. He was swimming. Just a terrible read on that play. And then Ryan Williams evades a couple of tacklers, gets into the end zone, and where all the long faces there in Tuscaloosa, where we saw from the student faculty, and it looked like they were going to just be crying in their beer at the end of the evening, they bounced back. they were able to get that touchdown, and they convert on the two-point conversion to make it 41-34. And then here comes Georgia, and we thought maybe perhaps that they would be heroic. And that would have been a win for the ages for Georgia. But as it was, Carson Beck, as he methodically marches his team down the field, throws it into the end zone, which I thought was risky at that point. I know it was one-on-one, but to me, they didn't need to go for the home run there. But as it was, intercepted, game over. Alabama hangs on, survives, and even with that, they catapult themselves to number one in the nation over Texas. And Georgia falls to 5. Classic game, 1,000%. For early September, or really late September, but early in the college football season. Week 5. And here they were on the grand stage with a game that certainly did not disappoint. And unfortunately, it's a situation where one of these two teams have not been ousted by this loss. If this was last year, this would have been enormous. But as it is, as we all know, Georgia drops down to 5, and I understand they still have 2 tough games ahead of them. They got to go to Texas and at Ole Miss, who had a brutal loss on Saturday. Inexplicable. How they lost to Kentucky, and listen, Kentucky's been game. They gave Georgia all they could handle in losing 13-12 in their building with some questionable coaching decisions by the Wildcat coach, but they have been just surprising in these big games against the big SEC teams. But for Georgia, they still have those 2 games left. And I would think if they win both of them, they'll be fine. They may lose one of the next 2. Now, I still think even at 2 losses, they'll still make it into the tournament. But that was one that I'm sure Kirby Smart is still licking his chops and still smarting, pun intended, over that loss and some of that decision-making there in that game. So for Georgia, I know that they're hurting, but in the grand scheme of things, at least as of right this moment, it's not damaging to their postseason hopes. And for Alabama, now is this going to be a team to be reckoned with, not only for the rest of this regular season, but are they going to be one of the 2 teams last standing for a national championship? And Jalen Milrose played phenomenal. This is a guy that last year, even with the 4th and 31 against Alabama, etc., I didn't think that he was going to have it in him. But he's having a Heisman Trophy season so far, as evidence of what you saw there Saturday night. And if he continues this, Alabama is going to go far, and maybe he'll be the best college football player in the nation when it's all said and done. Then you had Utah lose a inexplicable game at home to Arizona, where they weren't even in the game. They were down throughout 23-10. I mean, what happened? That's one to answer to if you're the Utes, where in your building losing to Arizona, and that's not a knock on the Wildcats, but still, Wildcats were running wild this weekend, beating Ole Miss and Kentucky, that is, and now Arizona beating Utah. So those are 2 games that certainly had piqued my attention. Notre Dame beating Louisville 31-24. I know they had to hang on there late, but Notre Dame, no surprise there, as they had bounced back nicely from the loss there to Northern Illinois a couple weeks ago. Penn State beating Illinois. Now, they did nothing offensively in the game. Illinois, that is, because they only put up 7 points. And same for Penn State for that matter, but their defense stood up. Only 219 yards for the Fighting Illini, which they went out in a whimper. So Penn State continues to play well here and see if they can make a case there for the college football playoff later on this year. Miami survived just would have been a catastrophic loss to Vatek at home. The Hail Mary at the end was incomplete after a long review, but they end up just wiping their brow knowing that they escaped and got out of Hard Rock Stadium there with a win. So that was huge for the Hurricanes, as they're in the top 10 as well. And as we take a look at the top 10, obviously Alabama, followed by Texas, Ohio State, Tennessee. Georgia drops to 5. Then you have Oregon, Penn State, Miami, Missouri, Michigan, now back in the top 10 after losing to Texas, as we know, in that second week. But they've come back nicely to crack the top 10, followed by USC, who had a barn burn against Wisconsin. Wisconsin had a 21-10 lead, and we thought that USC was going to be in for it, but they scored 28 unanswered points, and they ended up winning 38-21. So kudos to the Trojans for coming back the way they did. And then you have, to round it off, Ole Miss, who dropped from 6 to 12 in the top 12. And we all know that this is not definitive because it doesn't mean that the top 12 teams in the nation automatically make it into the playoff. But this is just a barometer to see where these teams lie, the fringe teams. We'll talk about more as we get deeper into the year, especially once we get into November. And college football had a big weekend highlighted by that game there on Saturday night, which obviously is going to be a classic and one that will be remembered there for quite some time between those two behemoths of the sport. Now let me turn my attention and wrap it up here with the NBA as I lace up my high tops. Oof, this has been a tongue-twisted, tongue-tied, I don't know, just one of those podcasts that for whatever reason, this is what happens when I unfortunately took a podcast off last Thursday, and now to try to shake off the cobwebs, not good there, Jay Reels. So, all right, let's close out strong here. NBA, with training camps open, we know the Celtics and Nuggets have already opened their training camp as they have exhibition games, I believe, this week with the two teams as they're in Abu Dhabi. But now, with the curtain being raised on training camp, and you're going to see a lot of media day, I believe it's going to be more so tomorrow than today. Maybe some teams will have their media day today. Well, there's going to be a big one here in the Big Apple, or at least in SUNY Purchase, which is about, I don't know, half hour north from where I live in Westchester County. A shocking trade came down where when I first saw it, I couldn't believe it. And I understand that the center position by the Knicks has been compromised. Isaiah Hartenstein signed with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Mitchell Robinson, who can't get out of his own way, whether it's from injuries or foul trouble when he's in the lineup. The Knicks made a huge play for a guy that I think very talented, big man, one who has been a multiple All-Star. Off the top of my head, I don't know if he's cracked an All-NBA team. If he has, it's probably no higher than 2, maybe 3rd All-NBA at some point of his career. But a trade that does make the Knicks better, not only on paper, but I would think even on the court, for them to have the big year that I'm sure is expected from the coach, the organization, and obviously the fan base. But for Karl Anthony Towns to now come from Minnesota, which they came off of a big year in their own right, making it to a Western Conference final, beating the defending champs down 0-2 in their series, to then win in 7 games, especially a 7th game in Denver. But we saw the warts with Karl Anthony Towns, especially shooting from outside, falling in love with the three-point shot, which, as we all know, is what it is in the NBA in this day and age. But for Karl Anthony Towns to come to the Knicks, where Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo goes the other way, and I know the Knicks fans were probably up in arms maybe with DiVincenzo going that way because everybody was looking forward to the Villanova Knicks of DiVincenzo, Jalen Brunson, Miles Bridges, who was brought in from Brooklyn over the summer, and Josh Hart. So now one gets shipped there, and I get it. The Knicks fan could be upset, but listen, Dante DiVincenzo is not Steph Curry. And I understand the three-pointers and what he meant to the team last year, and even the playoff run, the mano-a-mano with Philly in the opening round, etc., and just the spark that he provides. And Julius Randle, who I thought was going to get traded, check those receipts in the summertime because of his play. Type of guy that's going to be a ball stopper. He's going to want to ISO, go one-on-one, and that's not what the Knicks are going to want to do here, especially with the way the team is constructed and with the way they performed in the second half without Randle with that shoulder injury. You knew that this team was going to be in a different direction and a different mindset when it comes to their offensive expansion and capabilities. But now to bring in Karl Anthony Towns, which was a trade, I guess, if you're Leon Rose and company, and even if you ask me, was that one that you had to do? I would have to say yes. But I believe he's in the beginning of a 4-year, $220 million extension. You have to throw that in there. And for a guy that has had success and a guy that does have good numbers and is going to be able to put up, you would think, 20 and 10 in his sleep. But here's going to be the underlying, and I repeat, underlying just outright importance of this trade is whether or not he's going to have the mental and testicular fortitude to play in the city. And people can say, well, Jay Reels, He's from Jersey. He's not even an hour outside of Manhattan from where he grew up. That's fine. And he could know his way around the city and have it like the back of his hand. Riding the subways up and down to Washington Heights, where part of his heritage being a Dominican player. Who knows? And kudos. And I hope he does well. Not against my Celtics, of course, but I hope he has a stellar time here in New York. But we've heard the whispers, and we've heard a lot of him not performing well in big games. And him reuniting with Tom Thibodeau, I'm sure that's been buried from the past. The days of he, Andrew Wiggins, and even Jimmy Butler, when he was a part of that team a few years back, I'm sure that's all been squashed. But he could have his big games against the Charlotte Hornets of the world. He could have his big games against the Portland Trail Blazers of the world. He could even have a big game against the Atlanta Hawks, or maybe an occasional game against Philly, etc., whatever it may be. But his performance is going to be based on what he does in April, May, and June. And I'm not trying to make him out to be the second coming of Kareem by any means. But a lot is going to be expected from Towns. You don't make a deal like this for him to just be a bit player, or for him to just be a cog in the wheel. He is going to be a big part. We know this is Jalen Brunson's team, but he is going to be, whether it's the Robin to Jalen Brunson's Batman, or even a 1A to Jalen Brunson. That's what the expectation is going to be from this guy, a big man who's going to not only rebound, score, defend when he has to, especially amongst the likes of guys like Kristaps Porzingis when he comes back into the lineup, and Joel Embiid, two guys in his own conference and his own division for that matter. Or even a guy like Evan Mobley, if they do play the Cavaliers again in the postseason. And I'm not trying to make Mobley out to be Bob Lanier, but still. This guy was brought here to be a final piece, to be the guy that's going to put them over the top or take them to an NBA final. Does he have the talent? Absolutely. But what's between the ears and what's in his chest? That is going to be the big question that's going to be answered next spring and beyond. And then I got to give it up. Derrick Rose retired after 16 years in the NBA. We know about his career very well. Youngest MVP in NBA history. On top of him being a guy that was explosive to the basket, had all the tools, was lightning quick, crossover, could dunk on you, even at was he 6'1", 6'2". And for Derrick Rose to have his career come crumbling down, in essence, that opening round series in 2012 in game one, where I believe it was about 2 minutes to go and the Bulls were already up by 10, where you could have argued, could have pulled them out of the game, and they didn't. And that was, ironically, Tom Thibodeau was the coach. For Rose's career to pretty much have changed on a dime, that game one, I believe it was a Saturday afternoon in mid to late April, or 2012, I should say, not 2022. That was the beginning of the end. Since then, he had not been the same player. Yes, he's had some good years and had some productive years, but never amongst the likes of those early years in Chicago, to where he was an MVP at 22, to where he had that explosiveness, to where he had the just overall ability to break you down, to dunk on you, could shoot, wasn't a big-time shooter, but could make shots, and unfortunately did not measure up to what he was from the injury, post-injury, to what happened prior to that. But nevertheless, a good career, bounced around a lot, traded to the Knicks, went to Memphis, Minnesota, as he concluded his career there, and kudos to Derrick Rose. Wish him the best as he closes out a career, which could he end up in a Hall of Fame? Now remember, this is the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame. These guys go in, even if just by reputation. I hate to say it, but for Rose, still a very good career. I don't think a Hall of Fame career in my eyes, and I'm sure a lot of people would say that, and that's not a knock, but who knows? Maybe one day he will be enshrined there in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame up in Springfield, Massachusetts. Who knows? At some point, maybe in the coming decade or so. That's what I have, people. I know the NHL starts there this coming week. I'll talk more about the NHL and have a preview for you guys and gals next Monday. I know the season starts. It's just Buffalo, New Jersey. And I'll have over-under totals. We'll get into that. Point totals, for that matter. I have to see how I'm going to pull that off. But that's what I have. Another episode just in the books, people. Just about in the books. Thank you so much for passing by. Thank you so much for dealing with a lot of my flubs and just, for whatever the reason, just trying to, I don't know, shake out the cobwebs, just try to regroup, whatever it is. But I promise to be a lot more succinct, a lot more crisper, a lot more streamlined come Thursday. And I will be back Thursday. I promise you that. So once again, I thank you for understanding and for my apology early on, as I mentioned, not being on last Thursday. But if you haven't done so, people, like I mentioned at the top, subscribe, rate, review, increase the visibility of this podcast. Send me a screenshot on socials. Send it to your family, friends, foes, frenemies, to those who like sports, love sports, the casual, diehard, rabid sports fan in your life, or lives for that matter. Please, people, I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate it. And thank you so much for carving precious time out of your day to listen to what it is that I have to say about what happens in the world of sports. Also, if you want to hit me up, do so at the following on my YouTube channel at JReels. Please subscribe there. That would be enormous if you could do so. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JReels Podcast, Twitter, X, JReels1, just a number. The old-fashioned way, the JReels Podcast at gmail.com. Any questions, comments, send them over to me. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood. It's in the DNA, as I like to say, talking sports since birth. The final 3 months of 2024, I have my sleeves rolled up. A lot of work ahead of me as I prepare for another year, the final quarter, as I mentioned. Come on, people, whatever it is that you got going on in your lives, let's get it on and popping now. Because Lord knows I will have to, must, and need to do that to continue to produce top quality content, all the sports in one podcast, in this case, a little bit over an hour, with nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JReels Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JReels Podcast, on the flip, baby.